What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Layback Podcast. Joining us today is formerly Emily Ferree, now Emily McFerran, formerly Ferree PT Lab, now Rival PT Lab. So many name changes, so many life events for Emily, but we are grateful to have her back on. She is now, I was going to say two-time guest, but she's also been a panelist on some of the Baseball Rehab Network stuff we've done. So I don't really even know at this point. Nonetheless, we're grateful to have Emily back and revisit some additional topics, kind of timely things in the baseball development space. But before we get to our normally scheduled content in the baseball world, Emily is in Kansas City right now working with some of her NFL clients. For those of you who follow her on Instagram, she has this amazing network of pro players she works with, and she does a lot of in-person work with them. We talked a little bit about this on the first episode, but Emily, since that's where you are right now, I'd love for you to do just kind of like a quick review of where you're at and how you serve your players.
Yeah. First off, I know I'm going to get this question. I get this question all the time. How do you work in other states when you're licensed in California? I hold multiple state licenses all over the country because of this. So yes, I am licensed in Missouri. That's where I'm practicing right now. But so I own my own practice. I primarily work with professional athletes, and my highest volume is NFL and MLB. I've got clients all over the country who are with other teams. And so in the off season, I'm training and treating those guys. And then, during the NFL season, my guys who are local, who play for the Chargers, I see those guys during the season. But then my players who are with other teams, sometimes either in a crisis because of injury, things happen and they need a little bit of extra PT care. I do travel out to them as needed. So I kind of bop all around the country trying to be available for these professional athletes with what they need and kind of the whole gamut of what treating, rehab, and training a professional athlete looks like. And when you're truly doing kind of year-round care, that does mean you go state to state a lot. And for whatever reason, just the way it shook out, I have a pretty good contingency of players on the Kansas City Chiefs. So I come out here pretty regularly. It's where I am right now. It is OTAs right now. We're about to move into mini camp. So things are kind of starting to ramp up a little bit with the NFL guys and just out here trying to keep them healthy.
Do workload injuries manifest the same way in football that we see them in baseball? I assume that's a pretty stock question.
I would say it's different because baseball is so repetitive that you can track workload a lot easier, especially when we talk about things like pitching. I've seen some of the workload reports that biomechanics groups and some of the sports science professionals that work for teams, how they're tracking things with their relievers versus their starters. And it's so advanced and so nuanced. And especially data wise, the NFL really doesn't have anything like that where they're tracking workload. I would say probably the most the NFL is doing right now with true objective workload tracking is with sprint speed and sprint distance stuff. But as far as a true workload management, it's way less tracked and way less objective in the NFL. And because it's not such of a repetitive sport, workload injuries don't show up quite the same. I would say the big workload injury is more so soft tissue based in the NFL. So soft tissue strain, stuff like that. And there's kind of this underload versus overload when are injuries happening. So in my opinion, if you are getting soft tissue injuries early on, you were underloaded. And if you're getting soft tissue injuries towards the end, you were potentially overloaded, like you couldn't last the season. So underprepared versus overprepared, there's a lot of debate about that. I know there's a lot of debate about that in the Tommy John world as well. I think we talked about this last time, but you know how I feel about that.
Yes.
And so I would say it's different for sure for the NFL, just because they're not doing the same thing over and over and over again. So it is different.
We'll spend some more time on some fatigue monitoring stuff, but now I am curious. Did you pick up these states or these licenses in other states before you had these players you worked with? Kind of like preemptive, like maybe this could be a possibility, manifest it in a way, or did you wait for someone to say like, "Hey, I think I'm going to need your services," and then you went ahead and got the license?
Yeah, I wait. So I know my players who, I've worked with for years and really rely on my services. And I kind of know like wherever they're going to be out in the country, like I'm going to end up going out there at least once. And it takes a solid, I mean, getting licensed in another state isn't a huge deal, especially coming from California. And again, this is probably more about physical therapy licensing than you ever need to know. But California has one of the most stringent licensing requirements. And so for us to go from a California license to another state license, Usually the only thing I have to do is, you have to fill out all your information, then you have to send like proof of licensure in California. You have to send, all your transcripts, usually do some sort of background check. And then sometimes they'll make you take a jurisprudence exam, which is just an exam of like, do you know the PT laws in that state? So it's kind of like an 8-week process, but it's really just like logistical. It's not that difficult. And so what I usually do is I look ahead, usually about 3 months before the season, I'll look ahead at where kind of all my players are, where they landed, where they've signed contracts, where they're going to be for the season. And I kind of have a good idea usually of like, hey, I'm going to end up in like Illinois and Missouri a lot this year. Like I better make sure I'm licensed in those states. Sometimes there's a surprise one that comes up and you can apply for like a rush licensure. But I do try to do it in advance and figure out where people are because, otherwise you're just dotting the map with licenses. But I've been doing this for so many years that I am licensed in so many states at this point that it is rare that I'll end up in a state where I'm like, whoa, I don't have a license there. But I do try and plan in advance about 3 months before the season starts.
I know you said this is more than anyone would ever care to know about the licensing process, but I
Mhm.
do have another licensing question.
Okay.
Is there any reciprocity? Like if you get licensure in one state, does it carry over to another?
That's a great question. There's something called the PT Compact, which if your state participates in the PT Compact, which I want to say it's like 35 states do, so the majority of states do participate in the PT Compact, then you can purchase reciprocal privileges in another state that also participates. Unfortunately, California does not participate in the PT
Right.
Compact, so I can't use those privileges unless I were to move my residence license to a state where there are compact privileges, which I actually have dual residency because I have an address in Kansas City now. So because I have an address, I can actually use my Missouri license as my like residence license and then purchase PT compact privileges with other states that participate. So yes, that is an option. It's a little bit more of a logistical nightmare if you are in a state that doesn't have PT compact privileges, which of course California is one of those states. But the vast majority of states do participate in the PT compact. So that's a way easier, way less of a headache option for people if they are in a state that participates in the PT compact.
Thank you for all of that. And I'm going to hold out hope that that actually impacted way more people than we ever could have expected, knowing that we do have a decent contingent of medical professionals and especially physical therapists that do tune into the show.
Yeah.
Seeing how you can look at our all-time guest list and I don't know. If we do a percentage breakdown, at least 10% of the guests and probably more are physical therapists. So we do have some impact. So
Love it.
thank you for all of that, Emily. But I know the first real topic that we even started to broach unintentionally or intentionally was that workload concept.
Mhm.
And this time around, we talked about, as you said previously when you were on the show, your idea of preparation in the baseball world. But I think given this time of year, whether it's playoffs in the college baseball world or
Mhm.
the championship season, and then we're entering the dog days now for professional baseball. Are you seeing anything new come across your desk when it comes to the way workload is being assessed or the way it's being managed, and then the way that you potentially are educating athletes or your clients?
Yeah, I think technology wise, some of the most interesting, somewhat new things are some of the wearable tech that's coming out that can track workload. Obviously, with baseball, they have, gosh, I'm totally blanking on the name of that sleeve, but there's basically a sleeve that you can wear that has some of the wearable tech that tracks like workload and torque and number of pitches, but how hard you were throwing and can get a pretty objective data on workload there. But they're even starting to come out with like workload monitoring for insoles for how fast people are running, how much ground reaction force they're absorbing, not absorbing, tracking that kind of stuff. Obviously, the wearable tech that is in most sports right now are like the catapult, which will track like miles per hour and distance and things like that. But I think if you added the insoles into that, there's basically these little mini like force plate insoles essentially. So that's tracking more like ground reaction force. So then you can actually track workload in the weight room based on like how much weight they're pushing, plus, on the field, because especially with football and contact sports, it's not just that they're running, it's that they're running, they're digging into the ground, they're contacting another 280-pound person, moving them, all that kind of stuff there's more to workload when players are on the field, especially in a contact sport, than just the speed at which they ran and the miles that they ran. So if we could actually kind of start calculating some of those torque-based measurements like we are with pitching with on-field athletes, I think that that could be really interesting. I think the more technology we develop, like the more down the rabbit hole you can really get about tracking this stuff. I do think some of the wearable stuff could be really interesting for the future.
Now, when you are helping athletes make decisions, because so much
Mhm.
of what you do is this one-on-one, you aren't with a team.
Right.
This is the perfect example. You are in Kansas City to work with athletes. You are not in Kansas City to work with the Kansas City Chiefs as a whole. And I know it's the same in the baseball world for you. We can just speak to the football example right now because that's where you are and that's what you're doing. What are you taking into account when you are working with athletes, whether it's to manage their workload directly or when you're trying to help them peak their performance? Because I know you kind of have to be, I don't want to say the brains for every one of your athletes, but that is one of the roles that you serve.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first and foremost, I think you have to work backwards and kind of reverse engineer their programs based on what you know they're going to have to do and for how long they're going to have to do it. So having a really good collaborative relationship with your athlete of really understanding what their role is on the team. Are they a starter? How many reps are they taking at practice? What is their day-to-day training schedule like once they get back with the team? What does their day-to-day training look like once they're in season? For football, it's like on average, how many snaps are you taking? Are you playing on defense and special teams? Like what truly is your workload like when it's at its peak? If I know where you need to end up, I can reverse engineer where we need to get you to. So I think it starts with really knowing what their workload needs to get to. And then the big thing to take into consideration, I see a lot of younger physical therapists or younger strength and conditioning coaches miss on is that they'll get athletes to, for example, let's talk about sprinting speed. Hey, I know you need to be able to hit full out speed by this time. They'll touch that and then send them back to their team. And there's a difference in being able to get to the intensity that you need to get to, but not be able to hold that volume. So it'd be like for a pitcher saying like, hey, I know you need to throw 98 miles an hour. We'll touch 98 and I'll send you back to your team. Well, they're not conditioned to throw an inning of 98 miles an hour. They're not conditioned to throw 6 innings of, whatever. So, and it's the same thing with our on-field athletes with football and other sports is that you need to have broken into some volume as well and not just the intensity piece. And like I said, it's a really collaborative approach with the athlete usually of understanding where they need to get to, what type of volume they need to hold, and then being able to periodize that out in a time frame that is allowing them to progress, in a healthy way. And then making sure you basically program in rest too, because that's one of the biggest kind of speed bumps people hit is that they just can't progress as quickly as they can because they never had the recovery time that they needed. And then you're fighting an uphill battle. So yeah, it's so much of it is collaboration with the athlete and then kind of reverse engineering from knowing where they need to get to.
How often are you actually writing on a program rest?
I mean, within the week, there's always rest programmed in. And then anytime we're getting something over a 2 month like periodized program, there will be like a longer deload period always. Yeah.
I know it's a really simple question. I just think it's so easy to talk about like the grind set with that being so popularized,
Yeah.
especially in the nature of the athletes that we tend to work with on our side with FlexPro. It's going to be guys that either had a prior injury or they're chasing some sort of developmental thing to unlock this next level of play. Generally, the easy way to think about that is, well, I'm just going to outwork everyone. I'm going to do more than I have ever done before because this injury doesn't define me and I have to make it back
Mhm.
or I have to throw harder, throw better stuff, whatever it is. And I mean, I fell into that as an athlete. I feel like I'm Michael Scott in The Office saying my biggest flaw is I work too hard. But
Mhm.
no, that like I feel like that has just become so common that rest, it's crazy. Like athletes need to learn how to rest. And
Mhm.
I even say that I guess we can turn this into the question. Are you then having to educate your athletes on what rest actually looks like or what recovery actually looks like?
Surprisingly, not as much. I think most of my athletes feel very aware of their need for rest. So that's not necessarily much of an uphill battle, but to any athletes or any, professionals who are working with athletes who maybe don't understand that or really want to like push through. Training, exercise, all of that is a load stimulus that we're trying to create an adaptation to. And if you're not giving the body the space and capacity to adapt, you're not going to get the result that you want. So eventually that workload is actually going to start working against you. So it's not that rest is a break from training. Rest is your space to make your training work, essentially. Like bones are responding to load and stimulus, muscles are responding to load and stimulus, your nervous system's responding to load and stimulus, your tendons and ligaments are responding to load and stimulus. And you have to give them in the same way that you have to give your body sleep and the correct nutrition. Like you can't just do a huge heavy lift and then not eat anything. Like you need to give your body what it needs to build new tissue. Rest is also the capacity for your body to do that. Rest is what allows your muscles to say, hey, we're not working right now. We're going to like, we get to repair now because there isn't a work stimulus put on us. If you aren't giving your body the space to repair, you won't get the response that you want. You're going to start running on an escalator uphill. You know what I mean? Like you're working against yourself at some point. So rest is as important to the remodeling process of your body as the load stimulus is, in my opinion. And I think science's opinion as well.
This maybe is where the question goes a little bit beyond what is hardcore research, at least from what I consume. Or maybe it's just taking things too far and maybe the stuff doesn't matter that much. I think at least the image that I see in my mind when I hear rest is sit on the couch and just kind of veg out and just crush calories. As you said, there is a point to fueling the body properly. I think most athletes at this point understand the fact that just eating a pound of chocolate cake, although it might make you feel good in the moment, probably long term isn't the best solution. There is a point to actually take the time, fuel yourself, and sit on the couch. But I guess like what are our myths when it comes to rest and what's like a true fact? Like are you a blue light glasses girl? Like is that going to help us recover? Is like replacing our light bulbs with like red light? Like are those things that it's like biohacking to the nth degree? Is that stuff actually going to make a difference?
Yeah, there's, some evidence behind some of the things that you suggested, but to me, like, it's kind of like a keep it simple, stupid thing when it comes to rest. Like, rest is mental and physical. So you need to do the things that are mentally allowing you to reset. We talk a lot about nervous system fatigue, but that's not just central nervous system. Like, that is emotions. Emotions are physical because emotions are neurotransmitters. Stress is a neurotransmitter. Stress becomes hormones. Like all this stuff is physical. So mental rest is important. So doing the things that allow you to mentally reset first and foremost is important. Then the physical rest part comes in, which obviously eating well is important to that. Vegging out on the couch, like if that's what you need to mentally reset, great. But when we talk about rest, it's actually, in my experience, less sustainable to get an athlete to buy into rest if you're like, hey, you're going to not move from the couch today, because that's not mentally healthy for a lot of people. And it's like, it's boring and it doesn't feel super sustainable. But if you're programming the type of rest that's going to feel like it's productive for an athlete, I feel like that goes a lot further. And so a lot of times when we talk about rest, we're not talking about completely unloading. We're talking about load, a change in load, not a complete unloading. And again, I think baseball is a really easy example of this. Like a deload period for a pitcher, it doesn't mean that they're shut down. It means that they're playing catch, throwing some easy long toss. They're not throwing 100% bullpens for a week, but they're still throwing. So it's load management, not load reversal. So same thing with other athletes. We talk about load management, not load reversal. So, one of my favorite examples is right after the NFL season is over, one of the athletes that I've kind of worked with year in, year out for the past, I think going on 8 years now. He's a native Hawaiian and the man loves the ocean and he surfs. So what I always tell him is after the NFL season's over, unless you have a specific injury that we need to rehab, go to take 2 weeks and surf and go on walks with your family and like hang out. And surfing is active, surfing is exercise. But to him, it's not the type of exercise he's been doing for the past 6 months. And it's a mental reset for him. So he's active. He does yoga, he surfs, he goes on walks, he's active, but it's not the type of load that his body's been going through for the past 6 months. So it is still going to be a true unloading for him, and it is still going to be a rest period for him. The same thing with my other athletes. Like I do have athletes who are really eager to be like, I really want to optimize this off season, so I want to jump in. And so the people who mentally really feel like they need to jump in and be productive, I'm like, great, come in 5 days a week. But I'm doing stuff like mobility routines with them. I'm doing stuff like low level activation routines with them, like getting really corrective with stuff. And so their body is resting, but mentally they feel like they're being productive and they're starting to work towards a goal. So you just have to work with your athlete and know your athlete. But to me, those rest periods are less about vegging out on the couch and doing nothing and more about load management, not load reversal.
I'm going to hit you with a phrase, and I guess I love the spectrum of truth to it because I feel like you are well poised to answer this question. I say it all the time that stress is stress. It's kind of the conversation that we've been having. There are so many things that actually go into stress. As you said, we need to recover mentally, we need to recover emotionally, we need to recover physically. How do you feel about that phrase? Like, are all stresses truly created equal?
Yes and no, to an extent. To an extent. In the same way that something that's emotionally stressful causes you to release cortisol. A, a heavy lift causes you to release cortisol. Nutritionally, coffee first thing in the morning causes you to release cortisol. So to some extent, yes, stress is stress. Like certain things that are physiologically happening in your body in terms of all different types of stress, whether it's a high intensity workout, which is going to release cortisol, or an emotional stressor, or a nutritional stressor, like all of these things will have a very similar physiologic effect in your body. But not all stress is stress in that, like, a physical workout is going to affect your muscles, tendons, and bones in a way that emotional stress doesn't. However, the really interesting thing that I would love to see somebody research is I just clinically, in my own experience and having done this for over 10 years now, I will tell you that there's been injuries I've seen in professional sports that don't make any sense. And you can't point to like, I feel like you were undertrained or overtrained or you weren't prepared for this specific thing. The one that comes to mind is I had an NFL player who second game of the season, like went to push off at kickoff, grade 2 calf tear. Like had fully warmed up, had just gotten done with, like, had no calf symptoms. Like, it was just like this weird thing. But then talking to him and starting the rehab process, he had spent the 2 weeks before that probably more stressed than he ever had been in his whole life. And it was so hard to come up with a physiologic reason why this injury happened between training or warm up or preparedness, or it was not a novel stimulus. And I have to think to some extent was stress in his mind and emotions affecting his body in a physiologic way that his central nervous system wasn't prepared for the demands of sport. Yes, there's a similar physiologic response to a lot of different types of stress. No, because different types of stress adapt to our body differently. But yes, potentially because there might be this overlap, especially when we talk about the central nervous system and we talk about nerve excitability and all these types of things that I think affect our body in a physical way that we don't always account for. I would love somebody to do some research on psychological stress and how that affects our musculoskeletal system because I think it has to. The really interesting one here, and again, there's no hard physical explanation for this, but everyone who's done it knows it. And as soon as I say it, people who know it are going to know it. But in the dry needling world, we talk about something called needle fatigue. So, I went through in Kansas City, got my advanced dry needling certification, which was like 6 months of like 4-day weekend classes and courses. And basically you learn all these dry needling techniques. And then for basically 8 hours a day, you pair up with another physical therapist and you guys are dry needling each other. So for 4 days in a row, like 8 hours a day, you're getting dry needled, like head to toe, your entire body. And by the end of the day, you get to a point by the end of the day where you stop tolerating the needles very well. Like the needles get more and more painful as the day goes on because your nervous system is so fired up, like you're hypersensitive because you've had so much nervous system stimulation from dry needling. Because dry needling, it affects your musculoskeletal system physiologically, but the way it does that is it triggers a spinal cord nervous system response. So you're constantly triggering your central nervous system. And by the end of the day, the level of fatigue is like, it's hard to have a conversation. You're so tired. Like you feel like you need to go to sleep. Like it is like a serious whole body, like mental and physical fatigue that you feel because you've like basically overstimulated your nervous system. So I think that there's a very real connection to mental, emotional, nervous system stress and fatigue that does affect us physically.
Thank you for that. That was awesome. Along those lines, have you explored kind of some of those, maybe not necessarily the systems, maybe you have your own techniques for mindfulness or helping an athlete recenter, but are those conversations that you also have with your athletes to explore a system that can help them reset neurologically or help
Yeah.
them find their center, whether it's mentally for true clarity? Are you bringing that into your practice? I know it kind of goes beyond physical therapy, but
Yeah.
again, going back to your unique relationships with the athletes that you work with one on one, I assume it becomes a more all-encompassing healthcare role than
Yeah.
just treating a hamstring strain.
Yeah. If my husband watches this podcast, he's going to have a good giggle because in so many aspects, I am like, practice what you preach. I believe
Well,
in that. I talk about
sorry,
that.
Emily, I got to call a timeout. If Mike doesn't listen, I'm going to be very upset. So he better.
I'm sure he will. Shout out, Mike. So in so many aspects, I am like, practice what you preach. You have to live what you talk about, what you do every day. Don't talk about it, be about it. Like I believe in that. I am the worst when it comes to mindfulness, like the absolute worst. And ironically, you're like, oh, maybe it's outside physical therapy. When I was in physical therapy school at USC, our very first year, we had a whole class on mindfulness. And I was sitting in the back, like, mindfulness, like meditating. Oh my God. I don't know why I've always just been about mindfulness. And it's so silly because I believe in it for everyone else. Everyone else should be doing mindfulness. And my husband is going to have a good giggle when he listens to this because he is such a believer in it. He wakes up every morning and he meditates for an hour to an hour and a half every single day. Like our days are organized around him like having to have this time where he like puts the noise canceling headphones in, like, and he like sits there eyes closed, like comes to his best self, like separates himself from his emotions, like processes everything. Like he's so good at it and he's so dedicated to it and he's such a believer in it. And since we have met, he's been like, you need to meditate. And I think only because he's been like, you need to meditate, I was like, I don't need to meditate. I will never meditate. And meditation is not for me, but I really should. So that's an area of my life I need to get better at. And I watch the way it changes Mike and how like centered he is coming out of that. And I do recognize objectively, here's where he's gonna have his giggle, that like I absolutely need to start implementing some sort of practice that works for me because I so believe in it for other people, but for whatever reason I've just personally been so against it. I don't have a good reason for that. So here publicly to everyone, let me just announce I'm going to go on a mindfulness journey. I'll get there. But to answer your question, what I normally talk about with my athletes is just the self-care aspect of like what brings you joy outside of your sport. You need to go do that. And really interestingly enough, I traveled to Chicago for an athlete this past NFL season, battling multiple injuries in a tough contract situation. Luckily, I have a close enough relationship with him that I was like, I think you're depressed. And like physically, here's all the things that I can help you and take care of you with, but like you need to take care of you in this aspect, whatever that looks like. You need to give your brain a space that is outside of football right now because you're so encompassed in this place that is so stressful that I can just knowing you, I can just see that you're in a dark place. And so I do talk to my athletes about, I don't necessarily prescribe what they should do for that because I don't feel qualified in that, but I just generally have conversations with them about like you need to find a mental space that is outside of your sport and that is outside of the demands of, you know, what you are working towards or performance. Like if it's getting into a good book series, like you just need something that's totally not performance and not sports related that you can kind of escape to, whatever that might look like, whether that's meditation in the morning, whether that's family time, like whatever it is, like you need to find what that is for you. So those are more the conversations that I have.
Continuing this kind of trend, now we're going to talk about routines. It just hit me out of nowhere. I feel like this is the perfect place to enter it into conversation. Do you think again, I know it's a spectrum and I'm just killing the flow with the question right here. So I apologize for that because I'm trying to make sure I get the wording right. Some people absolutely thrive on routines. Some people use routines as crutches. How important do you think finding the routine is for the individual? Because I feel like those kind of things that you cited oftentimes are associated with a healthy routine Or
Yeah.
for instance, you shared with us, we know Mike has to find his hour to an hour and a half to find his center and his inner
Yeah.
piece and then just be the man he knows he can be. And it
Yep.
all starts with taking that moment. That sounds very healthy.
Yeah.
However, if now we ask him to be a high level pitcher and he tells us, I can't, I cannot throw tonight if you do not give me an hour and a half. And sorry, sometimes your flight's going to get delayed. Sometimes whatever, you're going to show up late to the ballpark and it's out of your control and you're not going to have that time.
Yeah.
So now we're just opening up the door for routines. Sorry for no clear question there, but
Yeah.
again, just please, Emily, take it away.
So one of my favorite phrases, and I think it applies to this question, is that discipline equals freedom. So I think when you are very disciplined about a routine, it gives you the freedom to operate outside of the routine. For example, like if we look at conditioning, if you are disciplined to be super aerobically conditioned, going into a season and going into a game. You have the freedom to play how you want to play because you're not limited by fatigue. So, I played soccer my whole life and some of the conditioning is brutal for soccer because it is a speed-based sport, but it's also an endurance-based sport. And I remember a coach of mine, Carrie Crook, shout out. I always shout her out as much as I can because she was my high school soccer coach and she still coaches high school soccer. And she's truly one of the best coaches I've ever had and like life-changing coaching. She was amazing. But that was one thing she would harp on all the time is like you can play free when you're conditioned. So I know this conditioning sucks right now, but like it's going to allow you to play the way you want to play because otherwise you are literally changing the way you play because you're tired. You're not, making runs up and down the line because you're tired or you're not going after that challenge because you're tired, whatever it is. And I think when it comes to routines, when you are really disciplined about figuring out what works for your body and what works for your mind, it gives you the physical and mental health to operate outside of your routine. I'll use my husband as an example again. Like he's been so disciplined about his mental health space that he programs his whole day around like I'm going to wake up, make sure I wake up early enough to get my hour of meditation. And he goes to spring training and it's a super, he's not a morning person, God bless him. But spring trainings every single day is a super early morning, but he'll wake up at 5 a.m. an extra hour early to make sure he can meditate, to then get to the ballpark on time, whatever. But if something were to happen that he just had to jump in and go about his day and didn't have his time, he is so mentally locked into like his center because he's so disciplined about this every day that if he didn't have the opportunity to do that, he has the freedom to like still access that place and know who he is and like be healthy. And I think it's the same thing with routines that like if you are disciplined enough to be so healthy physically and have like your lifting routine and your mobility routine and your activation routine and then your routine of what you eat and your routine of sleep, that if you have one day where you get really crappy sleep because you're staying in a hotel that had a fire alarm going off or whatever it is, your body is like you're starting here. So if you take a knock here, you can still operate, if that makes sense. So I don't see disciplines as much of a crutch as I see them as an ability to operate however you need to. Like they're setting the foundation to do what you need to do so that if you don't have your perfect routine, you've created a base where you can operate off of that no matter what.
Connecting this way back to the baseball rehab space, I've talked about this seemingly ad nauseum. Someone hopefully can fact check me if they're a loyal listener of the podcast. But we talk about our velocity zones or our guidelines that we use when we write return to throw programs. And for us, although some people think it's a very strict rule, I actually think about it as quite the opposite because as soon as I tell an athlete what zone I want them to be in, if I tell them we are going to make a total of 60 throws between 78 and 82 miles per hour. That's eventually where we want to get to.
Mhm.
All I have said is what I want the stimulus to be, what I want you to actually experience or I want your soft tissue to have to deal with. But what that allows you the freedom of is deciding what drill you want to use. Do you want to do shuffle throws? Do you want to do jump throws? Do you want to do kneeling throws? Are we throwing a heavy ball? Are we throwing a light ball? And there are so many other variables that can go into solving the problem of how do we perform the 78 to 82 mile per hour throw. All I told you was what, because that gets us the stimulus to move you along. So I'm amazed that we are somehow able to connect this back to throwing programs in the baseball rehab space, but I try to always find a way. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's good or bad, but I feel like you kind of brought us
It's
there.
the world you live in. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I think that's great too because, like I said, when an athlete has some autonomy within programming, I feel like it's always more successful. They know their bodies, they know themselves really well, and giving them the space to have some authority in that, I think it goes a long way.
I'm going to hitch my wagon to this because I think we're just kind of continuing to agree in different words here.
Mhm.
But oftentimes we find ourselves in situations where we are trying to do too much, especially in the coaching side. Now,
Mhm.
of course, you need to intervene as a clinician. You need to tell athletes what they actually need to do and should be doing. But on the coaching side, it's really all opinion based at the end of the day. You can call back to a spreadsheet, you can call back to analytics. So we can make suggestions, but the athlete needs to be comfortable and confident with what they're doing. That's ultimately going to give them the greatest path for success.
Yeah, 1000%. Buy-in is huge. Yeah.
So that was a fun winding road to get there. And way back, I realized I had another question, but I didn't want to shut the door on this path we were on.
Okay.
So maybe this one's going to be much simpler. But you spoke to collaboration with the athlete a few times.
Mhm.
Now, that makes sense to me. However, I don't know how I've never asked you this before. What does collaboration for you look like with the actual teams and staff that these players are dealing with every day?
Yeah.
Because there's obviously PTs and athletic trainers and medical professionals that are employed by all of these teams.
Yep. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. It's always an interesting place to be the outside person. And I get asked questions all the time about like, if these professional athletes have training rooms and they have, ATs and PTs as resources, like why do they need somebody outside the team? There's a lot of reasons for that. And I see this more in the NFL than in baseball. And I think part of the reason is baseball, they're just gone half the time anyway. So you really are relying on the resources with the team a little bit more. But almost every player professionally that I know, especially in the NFL, has some sort of outside person that they use. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Sometimes it's just because they don't want every little nagging ache and pain to be on paper and documented. Sometimes they don't want to be the guy in the training room all the time. Sometimes they have something that they're playing through and working through, but they need help with, and they just don't want to be in the training room at 6 a.m. Like they want to come to PT at the end of the day. And sometimes it's because they're on a new team and they don't know the PTs and ATs there, but they've been working with me for 5 years. So there's a level of trust there that just hasn't developed with the team yet. And sometimes it is because they feel like the care that I give or somebody else outside the team gives is better. And that isn't saying anything negative about the PTs and ATs that work for team training staffs, but they are always overloaded. It just is what it is. They have so many athletes to care for and so little time. There does tend to be kind of this hierarchy in training rooms sometimes. If so and so's on X contract and makes X amount of money, he's always going to get, first come, first serve service. This person is an undrafted free agent. Like there's always going to be that kind of stuff that comes into play. And so it just is a reality that outside people end up caring for these athletes a lot. And that doesn't say anything negative about the team training room. It just kind of is the dynamic. So that being said, in my experience, most athletic trainers don't love it for valid reasons. I think they really want to be in control of what the athlete is doing. And when they're doing outside stuff, they obviously aren't part of it. So I would kind of put it into two buckets. Sometimes athletes are working with me and they do not tell the team. And then it's just between me and the athlete. And I'm not communicating with the team because that would be a HIPAA privacy issue. They're paying me privately. Like I can't give somebody's medical information to somebody that I'm not authorized to give it to, especially if they're coming to you privately and paying, cash or whatever. If they're on IR, the IL, and the team, and that they've communicated with the team that they want to get outside care, then the team knows I'm working with them. And then there's direct lines of communication. I'm sending daily notes, I'm sending progress updates, and the team is fully aware of what I'm doing. And then sometimes there's even situations where the athlete's working with both. They're in the training room working with the team, and they're also working with me outside the team. And then it just really comes down to defining roles of like, you're going to take care of this aspect of rehab. I'm going to take care of this aspect of rehab. You know what I'm doing, so we're not overlapping with each other and just clearly communicating. And some teams, that collaboration is amazing. I will say, shout out the Chiefs here right now. I've had one of the best relationships with the head AT with the Chiefs here. They're super communicative. They're super open to me working with their athletes. It's kind of been flawless. There's been other teams that get like more upset when athletes communicate that they want to get outside care and they're not as collaborative or helpful. Or when I try and collaborate and explain what I'm doing, they kind of take it more as like a threat than a collaboration. So I've had varying experiences, but yeah, it's an interesting thing to navigate. And I would just say having a very clear like role definition, like kind of who's taking lead, who's taking secondary, like you're going to basically set the program and I'll just fill in the gaps, or I'm setting the program. I'm telling you what to do with the athlete every day. I'm telling the strength conditioning coach what they're cleared for, not cleared for. I'm telling you what they can do on the field when they get to the facility. So just having those defined roles makes the process of collaboration a lot easier.
I would guess what we do isn't quite to the same extent, but I definitely share a lot of those sentiments. There are certain players we work with that tell us keep everything I am doing quiet because God forbid they find out that I'm working with you on FlexPro Grip. And then we have others that are telling their physical therapist or their athletic trainer and their strength coach, hey, I'm using this. I want you to get on a call with these guys so you know exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
And some of those absolutely love it and they want to say like, great. That means we don't need to spend as much time on finger flexion work, and that means we can cut back on doing our manuals. I was like, yeah, spot on. You don't need to waste the 15 minutes of day pressing on someone's fingers when we can take care of that and actually give you objective data with it. Versus others are like, well, that's going to be super limited because you're only doing isometrics and we have to do all these things. So like, what's the point of them even doing that because we're going to load them up anyways? Like, all right, well, that's going to be super fun for me to tell your athlete. Do you want to tell your athlete that, or do you want me to tell the athlete that who's
Yeah.
entrusted us with their forearm care? So
Yeah.
I don't know. It just seems like that will always happen. There's going to be certain insecurities that you have to deal with, and I guess that's just kind of the nature of the industry, which is kind of tough. When
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we should always have the player's best interest. It's so easy to say, but it seems like it's so much harder to do in practice.
Yeah. It's wild to me sometimes where I want to be like, hey, you know, we're on the same team, man.
Right.
Like,
We
we
all
want
want
the
this guy on
same
the
thing.
field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are working towards the same goal. Yeah. I had a instance, and I won't even say what team it was with, but I had basically these red flag injuries coming in. And I think it was because something that they were doing with training, and it was like team wide. It was like I had like 10 guys come in with this specific issue. And so I called up the trainer who I thought I had a good relationship with. And I was just like, hey, I just want to let you know, like I had literally 10 of these injuries come in this week, and it's like week 2 of the season. And I know for a fact none of these players are in the training room right now. So I don't think you know about it. So I can't tell you names, obviously, because of HIPAA. But like I just want to let you know, like you might need to take a look at your like sprinting program and the timing of it because like this stuff is going down. And instead of coming from the perspective of like this person is working with me to make sure like half our team doesn't go down and we don't all of a sudden have these catastrophic injuries, they took it as I'm undermining their athletic training room. And they started having meetings with players about like Emily's undermining us and you probably shouldn't be going to see her anymore.
Ah,
And it was like, I literally called you out of the goodness of my heart to be like, just so you know, like red flag, like stop this before this becomes an issue. So there's just instances like that where you're like, you know, we're working towards the same goal, right? It's that your players are healthy and available to play. Like
right.
that's my goal. Is that not your goal?
Yeah, and of course, what stinks is the nightmare stories are always louder than the great ones, right?
Yeah.
That's the story that's going to stick with you rather than the great collaboration that you had with someone 2 years ago, just because every single email response or phone call was just like, thank you so much, that's great, I'll add it to the notes. There's
Yeah.
nothing fun about that story, but that's how
Yeah,
we want all of them to go.
exactly. Yeah, so you're dealing with personalities and people and egos and politics just always. And so sometimes it's really easy and smooth and sometimes it's less so. But I've really learned to let the athlete be the decider about what the level of communication is and what the lead roles are.
Mm,
So I just communicate with the athlete like, do you want me to take the lead and delegate to the team what I want them to do? Or do you want the team to take the lead and I will fill in the gaps? Like you be the decider. Because if you come in like, hey, I'm going to lead this rehab, like that's already hard for team staff. But if the athlete is saying, hey, I want Emily to be the lead, you guys communicate and figure it out. Like I haven't come in guns a blazing, you know, and it's just easier that way. Like, so if the athlete really directs what that relationship looks like, I have found that it goes smoother.
Now, more of a fan question for you. It's not like a true fandom, like, oh my gosh, who's the best player you work with? No, it's given the fact that the majority of your clientele is professional baseball and professional football, are you seeing football still be more of the ilk of you can't make the club in the tub compared to baseball, where it seems like the training room has been a little bit more accepted as like, hey, we understand this is recovery work or things that are going to help you stay on the field?
I do feel like in football, there's a little bit more of a stigma of being in the training room than there is in baseball. And I think I don't know this for sure, but my guess is because there's already kind of an established expectation about recovery, especially for your throwers. Like all of your throwers have like an expected, like, hey, after you throw, you're coming into the training room, you're going to do your manuals, you have this specific recovery routine. There's already an expectation of if you are healthy, you're in the training room for a specific purpose. There is less of the like preventative recovery expectation in the NFL. And my players in the NFL who come to see me regularly who aren't necessarily outright injured, like they don't have a documented injury that they're missing time for, but every NFL player's got little sticky stuff going on that needs attention and needs to be addressed. And I'm seeing them regularly, 2, 3, 4 times a week. And they're in this routine with me and it's keeping them healthy and they feel great. But they like, that's not happening in the training room. Guys are really only in the training room if they're injured. And I really do think that if the NFL and team wide, if they like adopted this culture of like, you also do maintenance work in the training room and like we will schedule it, we'll help you program it. But the expectation is everybody on the roster has a recovery routine. And if you tell us you're doing a recovery routine outside the team, okay, great. But if you don't have one, like your recovery routine is in the training room and like just normalizing being healthy, but in the training room, I think it would break down a lot of the issues that NFL training rooms have of keeping guys in house. But I also think it would break down that stigma a little bit and guys would get help more often. And I think they'd be healthier because I think maintenance work is so important and recovery work is so important. And I'm doing it very regularly outside the team. And I think there's a possibility that if they kind of reorganized how they ran training rooms a little bit and spent a little bit more money in there, it's a whole other conversation, but if they spent a little more money in there, then I think that they would have the capacity to really provide that as well, which would just benefit everybody.
You might have just unintentionally given a little pitch for you to be like medical coordinator or something like that, maybe one day for an NFL team. Uh,
Yeah.
they have those roles all over baseball. I know people are called medical coordinators in football, but I mean, shoot, I look at what the Nationals just did this offseason and they brought in people specifically to revamp systems. I
Mhm.
know that's part of what Mike did when he got hired by the A's originally, and then
Yep.
very similarly now getting brought over to the Royals. Like that
Yeah.
happens all the time in baseball of let's audit our system and let's actually make a change.
Yep.
And it sounds like you just gave a potential, I guess, teaser of an audit in the football world. So Emily,
Yep.
if that job comes your way one day, just I don't know if you've had that conversation before, but I would like to take some credit for maybe the conversation starting on the Layback podcast.
I will give you credit. I will tell you what, I've had two teams pursue me for a very similar, like a director level role.
Oh,
Uh,
that'd be really cool, but you obviously wouldn't be able to work with all your players and all your
yeah,
clients.
it would be a huge career change. So not to get like too mafia boss, but they'd have to make me an offer I couldn't refuse.
Hey, I love it. That's where it should be, and
Yeah.
maybe one day that will happen. And then I would say you could retire to the beach in California, but you kind of already are on the beach in California.
I know. We are very privileged where we live. That is one thing. All the travel I do, I'm like, people want to rip on California for a lot of reasons, but there's a reason it's expensive.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
That's how I feel with us going back to St. Pete, Florida now. It's just like,
Yeah.
gosh, I just looked at a house that we were on a FaceTime call today, looking at a house and just like, God, this is so much more expensive than where I live, but it totally makes sense as to
Yeah.
why. But that actually provides a little bit of a softer segue because I was going to make the harshest change in podcast content imaginable. So we hop, skip, and a jump over to this will probably be the last topic we get into, just given how much time we've already been on. But I promised one of the players we work with that I would find the right person to answer this question. And I
Mhm.
think that could potentially be you, given your role in treating athletes as well as your biomechanical background. I
Okay.
had an athlete hit me with the question that he thinks turf mounds are leading to additional injuries in pitchers. I asked him as to why. He just said, I feel like we have more guys going down with knee injuries and things like that due to the stability or something, is his guess on the mound. I went in and found a couple of research articles on the potential torques on turf mound versus dirt mounds, seeing how people tend to complain about turf mounds all the time. The
Mhm.
most recent literature would suggest that arm torques are higher actually on a dirt mound compared to a turf mound. I
Yeah.
think that was a study done out of ASMI. I'm curious if you have looked at that at all. I know you have a biomechanics lab accessible to you, and
Yeah.
you obviously have a turf mound in there.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you've been able to do biomech capture on a dirt mound. Again, this is one of those very poor questions where I more just want to introduce a topic and turn it over to you and
Yeah.
see what you can share.
I haven't done the deep dive on dirt versus turf, but I will tell you just from what I know, it makes sense to me that arm torques would be higher on dirt because performance should be higher on dirt because you have cleats that stick into the ground with dirt. And so it's the same thing with like your lead leg block. Like the stiffer you are, the more ground reaction force you're not going to absorb, which means the more ground reaction force you're going to transfer. Again, when you're stiffer on a dirt mound, they have a little bit less give. Your cleats are sticking to the ground because your spikes are sticking into the ground. You are going to transfer more force up to the arm. So the arm force should be higher, but because of that, like performance should be higher. So again, I think we have to caveat a little bit with, when we talk about elbow bears torque and all this kind of stuff, and it's, oh, it went higher, bad. Not necessarily, because if
Right.
it's still within a range that the body has the ability to attenuate that force and that load, what that means is that you're probably throwing harder. The most obvious example is just broadly and generally, the harder you throw, the more torque is going to go through your arm. Does that mean throwing hard is bad? No, we want to throw hard. So we want to prepare the body and the arm to be able to handle that amount of torque. So that makes sense to me that a dirt mound would be more torque in the arm. I don't necessarily think that means it's less healthy. But because of that, and I haven't done any research on the incidence of injury, turf versus dirt, but I do think I wonder specifically with the back leg too about force generation and being able to kind of grab that dirt a little bit better than turf. What that would do, so much of what happens biomechanically downstream happens because of how you generate force in that back leg. When you generate it, your ability to turn that back leg all as one piece and not segmented, the timing of that rotation with extension, all that stuff. So I imagine that changes dirt versus turf. I couldn't tell you the specifics or if that's been researched. It's not something that we've specifically looked into because especially with biomech research, like we're just enslaved to the area that we can take the capture. So we're
Right.
either on dirt or turf. So it is what it is. So it's not something I've looked into specifically.
I'd also be curious, maybe for potential future research, we almost have to go farther at this point than to just say turf versus dirt because it's so easy to associate turf mound with our portable turf mounds that we're just throwing in a mocap lab
Right.
versus the field turf mounds that exist. And I think that's what this athlete is talking about of the way the cleat gets caught in the actual rubber pelleted turf, not just
Yeah.
our carpeted mounds that exist. I know you had an illustrious soccer career yourself. I'm sure you have strong
Illustrious feels
opinions.
really generous.
We can call it illustrious, but I'm sure you have strong opinions nonetheless of playing on a turfed field versus a grass field because I think if any sport has been outspoken about that, it has been the soccer world.
Yeah. Yeah, there's very well documented research, especially in the soccer world, about injury rates on turf versus dirt, specifically ACL tear rates on turf versus dirt. And so, there was a lot of controversy with this past Women's World Cup because all of the fields were turf, and that would never be acceptable in the Men's World Cup because athletes know how much, and shock absorption is a huge issue on turf versus dirt because turf mounds, it's concrete underneath. So it is a lot harder on joints and injury rates are higher. Ball performance is different on turf versus dirt. So all these male athletes, like we would never dream of putting them in the soccer world, in the FIFA world. We never dream of putting them on turf fields for the World Cup. Like it would all be grass, immaculately kept. Grass fields are more expensive. And then the Women's World Cup, comes and it is easier to put together these turf fields and maintain these turf fields. And they're women, so we don't care. But even when I talk to my NFL players, like there is a conversation constantly of, oh, we're playing X stadium. Oh, it's turf. Like, or oh, I got drafted to this team, or I got signed to this team, and like we have a grass field. Like all of our home games are going to be on grass. Like that makes such a big difference. Or if there's specific injuries that they're dealing with or that are nagging, that are intra-articular, are always more flared up after a game on a turf field. So it feels very obvious to me, turf versus grass, what is healthier and what kind of incites more injuries and what has less shock absorption. And then again, like when you talk about, the big one everyone knows is MetLife Stadium. It's like the curse of MetLife Stadium, the amount of times we see these catastrophic ligamentous injuries, most of the time because a cleat is getting stuck in the turf and it doesn't give them the freedom to get out of bad positions. And they end up, seen some really gnarly things at MetLife Stadium. So it's, I haven't looked into the injury rates in baseball. There was a really interesting, at the beginning of the season this year, a pitcher who tried to field a ball that kind of came back and he just like had a funky, weird step and went down and it was a turf field. And so again, like you see these things and you have to wonder, like, if your cleat is contacting the ground in a different way, like, is that going to lead to more injury? I would think yes. Again, I think the pitching turf versus dirt mound conversation is really interesting. It's not something I've specifically looked into.
I'm infatuated by the playing surface debate because I'm not a professional athlete by any means, so getting to play on turf is wonderful for me because it at least means I have a true playing surface and I'm not scared of
Potholes.
a pothole or a ball taking a bad bounce of any kind or something like that. And then that thankfully is not something many professional athletes have to worry about. However, just as you said, the MetLife nightmares, I know it's not called Heinz Field anymore, but I remember there were some nightmare stories that have also come out of the playing surface in Pittsburgh, which is natural grass, but it sounds like because that is also the home field for University of Pittsburgh, and they hold concerts on it throughout the week and everything like that, that just by the time November, December comes around, they're just playing in a mud pit, which can't be fun either. Not that I'm the one that has to front the bill on maintenance, but I think these will forever be very interesting conversations. So I'm guessing though, from your end, if you took a poll of every one of your athletes, they would all prefer to play on natural surfaces.
Yep. Yeah, across the board.
In every sport you treat, I assume.
Yeah, and baseball, I think, especially when you're at the professional level, those fields are all so well maintained for the most part that you're not coming into, some of those issues that you described.
Right.
The conversation, especially like in college ball about turf, is like you said, the predictability of like infield grounding and stuff like that. But I think you have those same benefits if you are with a very well-maintained field.
Of course.
Which comes at a cost, which is why it's usually at the professional level. So assuming that all of that is very well maintained, it's grass all the way.
There you go. Well, I told you we would hit one last topic, and it was going to be a hard shift from everything else we talked about on the podcast today. Emily, I appreciate you sitting through this. Given the fact that names have changed, I am going to ask you to plug everything once again. So if people want to find you, learn more about your practice, and I know you provide a good bit of education on your Instagram as well for people aspiring to get in the field. So please plug away.
Yeah, you can find me at rivalpt.com. You can email me at info@rivalpt.com. You can find me on Instagram at rival.pt.lab. Same thing with TikTok. Although truthfully, I'm never on TikTok. I'm a millennial, so like Instagram's where I live. And, as education-wise, I actually do run a mentorship program for physical therapists who want to work in sports or want to kind of refine their sports rehab knowledge base, clinical application skills. And so it's a 3-month course, and it's a combination of rehab, clinical education topics, case studies, clinical reasoning, return to sport programming, that kind of stuff, and business and career development about how do you set yourself up to be, a PT in the professional sports world. So if you're interested in that, again, you can email me at info@rivalpt.com or message me on Instagram. This is where I live online. Rival.pt.lab on Instagram. So
I wish we would have talked about the mentorship program earlier because now I have so many more questions, and I guess that just means we'll have to find another time for you to come on in the future to break that down. But
awesome. Love
Emily,
it.
this was a pleasure. Thanks again for making the time. And to everyone out there, thanks for laying back with us.